When fans pay for a fight, they expect fast-paced, violent, high-level combat. But sometimes, fighter performances are so underwhelming, they sadly make a top 10 list on YouTube. What an achievement. Many of these matchups aren't stylistically dull, but due to various factors, just couldn't put it together on the night. Whether it was the wrong dance partner, a mental block, or something else, unfortunately, this is part of the sport. Today, we'll be covering fights that failed to captivate fans, and ultimately led to endless trolling. I'm George from Fight Game Insider, and this is the top 10 worst UFC fights. Israel Adesanya vs Yoel Romero. Israel Adesanya and Yoel Romero are two top names in the UFC, so fans expected them to light up the octagon at UFC 248. But what they delivered was nothing short of a disappointment. Both the fighters spent most of the fight circling around each other without really engaging. This continued for so long that the ref finally had to intervene and remind them that they were in the octagon, not their living room, so they had to crack on. For a while, Romero literally stood still with his guard up, just not moving. The pace did eventually pick up slightly, with Adesanya throwing some leg kicks and Romero at times pressing forward, but both fighters were still clearly unwilling to take the fight to one another. Despite Adesanya getting the win, sadly, by the end of the fight, the winner was unclear. But one thing that was very clear, the fans' disappointment. Ben Askren vs Douglas Lima. Ben Askren and Douglas Lima started off strong with Lima's early takedown and Askren's hip toss takedown. However, Lima's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu couldn't prevent the fight from following the same old pattern seen in Askren's previous bouts. With every round, it started feeling like a movie we'd seen multiple times before. The champion utilized his grappling expertise to grind out his opponent, maintaining control but not really doing anything with it, frustrating the challenger and fans. The rounds that followed had similar energy, with Askren's short strikes trying to exhaust Douglas Lima as well as viewers. And even though Askren won the fight, he was criticized for his grappling-heavy style and agonizingly dull performance. Anderson Silva vs Talas Leites. The fight between Anderson Silva and Talas Leites was more of a staring match than a combat one. Silva spent 25 minutes trying to deliver awkward side kicks, while his opponent Talas was more or less unresponsive. As the fight progressed, Silva grew increasingly frustrated with his opponent's reluctance to actively engage. With 25 rounds filled with minimal action and lackluster exchanges, Silva was ultimately declared the winner of the dragged-out battle. Frank Mir vs Mirko Cro Cop. Mirko Cro Cop is famous for his energetic left high kicks in the octagon, but he seemed like a shell of that aggressive fight machine at UFC 119. His movement was slow and cautious, as if he was too afraid to be his true self. On the other hand, Mir wasn't much better. Even though stylistically, this fight matchup was ideal, both fighters spent most of their main card event staring each other down and disappointing the fans. They were obviously too afraid to lose a fight at the end of their careers, so they were hesitant to engage. The fight was finalized by a third round KO, but it was too little too late. Was it worth it to deliver such an uneventful performance to save themselves a loss at the end of their career? Let us know what you think in the comments. Francis Ngannou vs Derek Lewis. The famous bout between Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis was one which even Joe Rogan agreed was the worst MMA performance in UFC's history. He called it the worst heavyweight fight he had ever seen. This was one fight where the best exchange happened outside the octagon at the weigh-ins. In fact, it was so bad that the fight made a record with the second fewest hits in a 3-round fight. At one point during the fight, the ref had to warn the fighters not to stall, otherwise they would lose points. Finally, Derek Lewis was given the nod following minimum effort and a single head strike. Chris Lieben vs Michael Bisping. Now onto the main event at UFC 89, Chris Lieben vs Michael Bisping. After this middleweight bout, Lieben tested positive for stanozol. Ultimately, he was suspended for 9 months and charged 1/3 of his earnings. But the fight itself didn't seem fueled with juice in the slightest, as it dragged on for 3 unimpressive rounds, throughout which fans witnessed Michael Bisping go backward and attack Lieben with short blows. Bisping's game approach perplexed and totally suffocated Lieben, who would stroll forward only to do no serious damage. Overall, it seemed like a one-sided performance that didn't do justice to the build-up or main event position it was given. Clay Guida versus Gray Maynard. When you hear the names Clay Guida and Gray Maynard, you visualize blood and action. Both fighters are well known for delivering and enduring some serious damage. So when the two stepped inside the octagon, fans were expecting a nuclear fight. But the actual contest didn't go down like that. Guida's haphazard strikes and disorientated haymakers had fans and judges confused. It almost seemed like he was feigning his attacks and didn't want to land an actual strike on his opponent. And as soon as Maynard got in action and tried to land a punch, Guida would increase the distance and circle away from him. To fans, Guida looked like he was running around the octagon with almost zero contribution to the battle. Eventually, the referee had to threaten him with a point loss if he kept up his timidity strategy. However, somehow his sorry game plan worked out in his favor and he got the victory. But like we've seen many times before, in this fight there were truly no winners. Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza 2. The co-main event result between Esparza and Namajunas was a repeat of the promotion's very first strawweight title fight, with Esparza winning their first meeting in 2014 at the Ultimate Fighter 20 finale, inaugurating the UFC strawweight title. After many years, their paths crossed again at UFC 274. Everyone knew Rose had the advantage on the feet, while Carla was a force in the grappling department. Understandably, fans were interested to see how the neck-to-neck competition would play out. But even though the two were familiar with each other's fists, the action never really got going, and many were disappointed with how the bout played out. Rose clearly understood her disadvantage on the ground and was doing everything in her power to maintain distance and not let Carla place hands on her. And the biggest factor in this fight, like the others, was caution and a lack of action. The feel-out developed into a 5-round feel-out battle, with neither fighter making an impression in a title bout. Both were hesitant to engage, and they established the record for the fewest amount of significant strikes landed in a 5-round match. Rose had just 38 major strikes, while Carla had 30. A few takedowns at the conclusion of the bout swung the verdict in Esparza's favor, but many fans dubbed it the worst fight in the company's history. Next, we dive into a trilogy battle that ended up leaving a sour taste for all the wrong reasons. Anderson Silva versus Damian Meyer. Anderson Silva and Damian Meyer's fight at UFC 112 could have easily been a short, high-energy contest for the fans. But instead, Silva dragged out this potential victory over the 25-minute duration and turned it into a soul-sucking staring contest. Within the first 2 minutes, Silva was looking the clear superior fighter against Meyer. But what ensued after the first round was comic dancing and taunting episode from Silva. Throughout, he only landed 16 strikes, with Meyer laying claim to even less. Even though Anderson eventually won the fight, Dana White commented, "If you are that talented, be Mike Tyson. Go in and finish it in 2 minutes. I'd rather have somebody say, let's not buy the Anderson Silva fight tonight because he knocks people out in 2 minutes, rather than he runs around like a jackass for 5 rounds. Tim Sylvia versus Andre Arlovsky 3. After 2 first-round stoppages, the trilogy bout between champion Tim Sylvia and Andre Arlovsky was expected to offer another spectacular and brutal conclusion. But this time, fans weren't so lucky. Sylvia came close to finishing it in the opening round, but that was about the only bright spot in a battle that felt more like an out-of-breath chess match than a heavyweight title fight. We observed the two warriors refuse to engage, who were clearly overthinking taking the L. And the worst part, fans had to endure this for 5 agonizing rounds, where many had the expectation of another early stoppage. By the end of the fight, both were exhausted, and the audience in attendance were not afraid to shower them with boos. Are there other terrible performances in the octagon worthy of a mention? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell icon to be notified every time there's a new upload. And until next time, see ya!